Baltimore, Maryland. The faded brick apartment complex on Preston Street stood like a relic from better days, peeling paint, crooked mailboxes, and the constant hum of passing traffic. Tucked away on the third floor, behind a scuffed brown door marked 3B, lived Eleanor Bennett, a name that once meant something, now mostly forgotten. At 78, Eleanor's world had shrunk to the threadbare walls of her apartment. She moved through her days like clockwork, morning tea at the window, slow walks around the block when her knees allowed, and hours spent sifting through old photographs that no one else remembered. The neighbors called her the ghost in 3B. Some whispered she was losing her mind. It wasn't entirely untrue. At night, they could hear her, slow footsteps gliding across the floor, the faint shuffle of old slippers. Sometimes, the creak of the warped floorboards followed the rhythm of music only she could hear. No radio. No television. Just Eleanor, dancing alone in the small living room lit by the soft glow of a single lamp, her frail figure swaying to an invisible melody. Melissa, her only daughter, visited when guilt outweighed resentment. The visits were brief, polite small talk over untouched tea, reminders to take her medication, tense silences filled with unspoken history. Melissa hadn't stayed long the last time. She rarely did. Tonight, Eleanor stood by the window, the city's neon haze reflecting faintly off the glass. Her hand trembled slightly as she pressed it against the cool pane, eyes distant, somewhere far beyond the rain-slicked streets below. The song had returned. It wasn't coming from the walls or the neighbors' televisions. It was deeper than that. A low, haunting piano melody curling in the back of her mind, seeping into her bones like smoke from a long-forgotten fire. The same melody from her youth. The one that played when her heart still raced for someone who should have been by her side. Eleanor closed her eyes. Her feet moved without thought, her body remembering steps once learned in shadowed dance halls and smoky clubs. Her thin arms lifted, swaying gently. She danced slowly, alone, to the song only her heart remembered. Across the hall, Mrs. Rivera paused by her door, listening. She shook her head. "Poor thing," she muttered, retreating inside. But Eleanor didn't hear the pity or the whispers. The music carried her somewhere else, to a place of soft hands, warm laughter, and eyes the color of midnight. A place where the name Thomas Reed still meant everything. The world may have forgotten him. But Eleanor hadn't. And tonight, as the city pulsed outside and the past pressed in like a tide, she danced, to a song no one else could hear, but one that had never truly stopped playing. The rain tapped lightly against the window, a soft percussion that carried through Eleanor's small apartment like an old, familiar rhythm. Morning light bled pale across the faded wallpaper, illuminating dust particles that danced in the stillness. The song from last night lingered in her chest, curling around her ribs like smoke. She couldn't escape it, not that she wanted to. Eleanor moved slowly through her closet, sorting through forgotten cardigans and worn coats. Her fingers brushed across a wooden box, tucked behind a stack of old linens, hidden beneath the weight of years. The brass latch had dulled, but the moment she touched it, something electric sparked under her skin. Inside, wrapped in yellowing tissue paper, was the vinyl record, the same song from her dreams. Her throat tightened as she traced the faded label, Thomas Reed Quintet, 1959. Her hand trembled as she lifted the record, the edges rough with time. For a moment, the apartment faded away. Her mind spiraled backward, carried by the melody etched in wax. New Orleans, 1959, the French Quarter alive with the hum of music, the heavy air thick with cigarette smoke, jazz floating from club windows like honey in the summer heat. She was 18 again, wide-eyed and full of rebellion, sneaking out from her family's uptight home on St. Charles Avenue to lose herself in the forbidden rhythms of the city. That's where she met him. Thomas Reed. A young black pianist with hands that coaxed life from battered keys, eyes dark as polished onyx, and a smile that cracked the walls she'd spent her childhood building. He was everything her father warned her about. Dangerous, improper, impossible. And yet, she danced. In a backstreet club lit by flickering neon, Eleanor twirled beneath hazy stage lights as Thomas played their song. The room blurred. It was only him, the music, and the pulse of something that felt terrifyingly close to freedom. She could still feel his hand on her waist, guiding her across the sticky floor, the way his voice dropped when he whispered promises of New York, of music, of escape. But those promises shattered like glass when Thomas vanished. Eleanor blinked, pulled back into the quiet of her apartment, the record still in her hands. She exhaled shakily. They said he never existed, that Thomas was a dream, a fevered rebellion of youth. Her father's stern eyes, her mother's sharp disapproval, they buried him in silence. But the record was real. And so was the ache twisting beneath her ribs. Eleanor set the vinyl beside her old record player, its surface covered in dust. The turntable groaned to life. As the needle dropped, the melody filled the room, rich and raw, alive after all these years. Tears pricked her eyes. The song had waited. And so had she. The music faded, but the ache it left behind filled the room. Eleanor sat on the worn sofa, the old record still spinning on the turntable. Her fingers curled around a chipped mug of tea gone cold. The melody stirred something raw inside her, and the questions, buried for decades, clawed their way to the surface. She needed to tell someone. Melissa arrived later that afternoon, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum hallway, her expression already set in weary impatience. Her dark hair was tied back, her blazer neat, her eyes scanning the apartment like an inspector assessing damage. "Mom, you left the door unlocked again," Melissa sighed, shutting it behind her. "You have to be more careful." Eleanor didn't answer. Instead, she gestured to the record player, the vinyl still turning silently now, its song a ghost in the air. "He's real, Melissa," Eleanor whispered, her voice fragile but firm. "Thomas, the man I told you about. He existed." Melissa's jaw tensed. She set her purse down, eyes narrowing. "We've talked about this. You get confused sometimes. That's normal, at your age." Eleanor's frail hands trembled, but her gaze sharpened, fierce beneath the years. "Don't patronize me. I've doubted myself for so long, but I remember him. The music, it's his. I found the record." Melissa crossed her arms. "You've told me this story 100 times. A musician, a secret love, then he just vanished? Mom, you've lived alone too long. You've built memories around ghosts." Eleanor's voice cracked, but her resolve didn't. "Your grandfather made sure I questioned everything. He told me I imagined Thomas. He tore up the letters, burned the photographs, but he couldn't erase the music." Melissa stiffened. The room filled with unspoken history, the long shadow of Edward Hargrave, Eleanor's father. A man whose wealth could smooth over scandals and whose pride would never allow his daughter to love across lines society told them not to cross. Melissa had spent years resenting both of them, her grandfather's cruelty, her mother's silence. "I've heard this before, Mom," Melissa muttered, softer now but still guarded. "The family didn't approve. You were in love. Then nothing. You don't even know what happened to him." "I do now," Eleanor said, her voice gaining strength. "The record, it proves he was real. And they lied to me." Melissa opened her mouth to argue, but something in Eleanor's eyes, that stubborn, haunted determination, made her falter. "I'm not crazy, Melissa. They wanted me to believe I was. But you can't bury the truth forever." The room fell silent, the faint hum of the spinning vinyl filling the space between them. Melissa glanced toward the record player, unease tightening her chest. For the first time, doubt flickered beneath her skepticism. And deep inside Eleanor, beneath the ache of old wounds, a quiet, dangerous certainty took root. The past wasn't finished with them yet. The morning sun cut through the gray Baltimore sky, casting long shadows across Eleanor's cramped apartment. The city was waking up, but inside 3B, a heavy silence hung in the air, thick with anticipation. The mail had been left on the scratched wooden table by the door. Bills, flyers, and an unfamiliar envelope, yellowed with age, addressed in delicate handwriting Eleanor hadn't seen in decades. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, fingers brushing over the faded ink. Eleanor Bennett. The postmark caught her eye. New Orleans, 1959. She pulled the envelope close, her breath catching. How had it arrived after all these years? Why now? Melissa appeared in the doorway, noticing Eleanor's pale face and the fragile letter clutched in her hands. Mom? What is it? Eleanor slowly broke the seal, careful not to tear the brittle paper inside. She unfolded the letter, revealing a faded black and white photograph pressed inside. Two young faces, smiling shyly in the glow of New Orleans streetlights. Eleanor and Thomas, arms wrapped around each other, caught forever in a stolen moment. Tears welled up as Eleanor traced the edges of the photo with a shaking finger. The letter's faded cursive was hard to read, but the words burned clear. They buried more than the music, Eleanor. Find the truth before it's too late. Melissa's eyes widened, disbelief mixing with curiosity. Where did this come from? Eleanor shook her head, voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. But it means someone remembers. Someone wants me to remember. The room felt colder, the past pressing in around them like a storm. For the first time, the story Eleanor had carried alone was no longer hers to bear. The letter was a key, a crack in the wall of silence built by family secrets and decades of fear. Melissa sat down beside her mother, the weight of the moment sinking in. Maybe it's time we stop running from it. Eleanor nodded, eyes fixed on the photograph. Memories rushed back, the jazz clubs, the secret meetings, the stolen kisses beneath gas lamps. But also the fear, the threats, and the night Thomas disappeared without a word. That night had haunted her dreams for 50 years. And now, the letter was the first clue to the truth. Outside, Baltimore carried on unaware. But inside apartment 3B, a new chapter was beginning, one that would unravel the lies, betrayals, and love buried deep in the shadows. Eleanor folded the letter carefully, clutching it like a lifeline. The song only her heart remembered was about to be heard again. The dim light of the Baltimore Public Library cast a pale glow over the worn microfilm reader. Melissa sat hunched, fingers trembling as she scanned through faded newspapers and yellowed records. Eleanor's letter, the photograph and cryptic warning, had shaken something loose in her, a determination she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't just a distant daughter anymore. She was a detective, digging into a past her mother had buried beneath decades of silence and pain. Her fingers paused on a brittle page from a 1959 edition of the Baltimore Sun. The headline caught her eye, Jazz Pianist Missing, Mystery in New Orleans. The article detailed the sudden disappearance of a young musician named Thomas Reed, who vanished without a trace just months before a high-profile concert. Melissa's heart quickened. Could this be the same Thomas her mother had loved? She jotted down names, dates, and cross-referenced with police reports from Baltimore and New Orleans. But the deeper she dug, the more she unearthed walls of silence and obfuscation. Reports were scarce, often dismissed as local gossip or racial tensions swept under the rug. But the most disturbing discovery came when she requested sealed family records from the Hargrave estate, Eleanor's father's legacy. Melissa sat in a sterile room at the city archives, the Hargrave name printed on official documents that still carried a faint scent of old leather and secrets. She carefully opened the sealed file labeled E. Hargrave, Private Affairs, and began to read. The pages told a story darker than she'd imagined. There were letters between Edward Hargrave and city officials, discussing payments to hush families and suppress scandals, especially those involving interracial relationships. There were threats made against undesirables who dared cross social lines, as well as records of bribes paid to police to overlook certain disappearances. Melissa's stomach churned. Her grandfather had been a man of power and influence, but the price of that power was the destruction of innocent lives, including the man her mother had loved. She found a particular memo from 1959 that chilled her to the bone. It detailed a plan to handle a situation involving an unidentified black male musician in Baltimore, linked to a Hargrave girl. The language was cold, clinical, a directive to silence the problem before it escalated. The weight of it pressed down on her. Had Thomas Reed been a victim of her grandfather's ruthless ambition? Melissa's mind raced as she called her mother, voice shaking with a mix of fear and urgency. Mom, I found something. The Hargraves weren't just disapproving, they were dangerous. There's evidence of bribery, cover-ups, even threats. This wasn't just family drama. It was a deliberate erasure. Eleanor's voice trembled on the other end of the line. I always knew. But hearing it out loud, it's worse than I imagined. Melissa swallowed hard. We have to be careful. If this got out, it could ruin the family name, but more importantly, it could put us in danger. Eleanor wiped tears from her eyes. I don't care anymore. I want the truth. The next day, Melissa met with a local historian who specialized in Baltimore's civil rights history. The man, a middle-aged African-American with kind eyes named Harold Jenkins, listened intently as Melissa shared what she'd found. This kind of suppression wasn't uncommon, Harold explained. Many families used their influence to maintain social order, especially when it came to race. But it's rare to find actual documentation like this. It's valuable. Harold pulled out old city maps, highlighting neighborhoods where Thomas might have lived or performed. You might want to check with local jazz clubs. Some older musicians or their families might remember him. Melissa nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. I'm going to find Marcus Reed, Thomas's brother. He has to know something. Back at Eleanor's apartment, mother and daughter sat together, a fragile alliance forming amid the storm of revelations. I never wanted you to carry this burden, Eleanor said quietly. But maybe it's time we face it together. Melissa reached across the table, squeezing her mother's hand. We will. No matter what. Outside, Baltimore hummed with life, unaware of the secrets stirring in apartment 3B. But for Eleanor and Melissa, the past was no longer a ghost. It was a challenge. And they were ready to face it. The worn leather chair creaked softly as Melissa settled into the modest living room of a small Baltimore house. The air smelled faintly of tobacco and aged wood, and old jazz records lined the shelves like trophies of a lifetime spent in music. Across from her sat Marcus Reed, tall, weathered, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that held a lifetime of stories. He was Thomas Reed's younger brother, the last living link to a man who had vanished without a trace decades ago. Marcus's voice was quiet but steady as he spoke. Thomas loved Eleanor. More than anything. They planned to run away together, start fresh, far from the stifling eyes of their families. Melissa listened intently, hanging on every word. For the first time, the distant memories her mother clung to were given life through Marcus's recollections. But he disappeared, Melissa said softly. Why? What happened? Marcus's eyes darkened, clouded with regret. I never knew for sure. Thomas got a warning, from powerful people who wanted to keep them apart. My brother was proud but cautious. He thought running was the only way to protect Eleanor, and whatever was growing inside her. Melissa's breath caught. The thought of Eleanor pregnant decades ago, a secret buried in silence, twisted something painful inside her. He was scared, Marcus continued. Scared for Eleanor's safety. He told me he'd send word when it was safe. But then, nothing. Silence settled between them, heavy and suffocating. Melissa swallowed hard, searching for hope in Marcus's tired eyes. Have you heard from him since? Marcus shook his head. No. I kept his name alive in the music scene, told a few people to watch out for him, but after a while, everyone assumed the worst. No one wanted to believe he'd just disappear. But you never gave up? Melissa pressed. No, Marcus said firmly. Music was Thomas's soul. He never stopped playing, even if no one heard him. Melissa glanced at a faded photograph on the mantel, a young Thomas smiling, fingers poised above a piano. Do you think he's still out there? Marcus shrugged. I don't know. But if he is, he's been hiding in plain sight. People change names, start new lives. But the music, that never dies. Suddenly, Marcus's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, then looked up with a flicker of surprise. That's from an old friend of Thomas's, Marcus said. Someone who claims to have seen him recently. Melissa's heart raced. Where? Not far from here, a retirement home in Maryland. They say he's living under a different name. Quiet, keeps to himself, but still plays the piano. Melissa exchanged a glance with Marcus, disbelief mixed with cautious hope. "Do you think it's true?" she asked. Marcus nodded slowly. It could be. Thomas was a survivor. If anyone could keep the music alive against all odds, it'd be him. Melissa felt a new determination rise inside her, the fragile flame of a possibility that Eleanor's long-lost love might still be alive, waiting to be found. As she left Marcus's house, the sky darkened with approaching rain. The city seemed to hold its breath, as if the past was stirring awake. Back in apartment 3B, Eleanor sat by the window, listening to the faint echo of a piano in her mind. The music had never stopped. And neither would she. The late afternoon sun dipped low over Baltimore, casting long shadows through the skeletal branches of an abandoned garden behind an old estate. The property, once belonging to the Hargrave family, had long since fallen into disrepair. Windows boarded up, paint peeling, and wild ivy choking the crumbling stone walls. Melissa, Eleanor, and Marcus approached cautiously, the weight of history heavy on their shoulders. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, mingled with a faint whisper of jasmine from a neglected shrub. "This was their family home," Marcus said quietly, voice tinged with both reverence and bitterness. "Where Eleanor grew up. Where everything changed." Eleanor's eyes scanned the overgrown yard, memories flickering behind her gaze. The grand parties, the stern faces, the secrets hidden beneath the polished veneer. She swallowed hard, clutching Melissa's hand tightly. They moved slowly through the tangled underbrush, guided by Marcus's steady steps. He paused near a patch of disturbed soil half covered by fallen leaves and broken twigs. "There," Marcus said, kneeling. "I've come here before, but never dared dig. This place holds more than just memories." Melissa pulled out a small trowel she had brought, and together, they began to clear the earth with hesitant, reverent movements. The soil was soft beneath their fingers, as if the earth itself was ready to reveal its secrets. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Finally, the edge of something solid emerged, a rough wooden box, darkened by time and earth. Eleanor's breath hitched. Her hands trembled as she brushed away the last of the dirt. Could it be? Marcus exchanged a grim look with Melissa. "There's only one way to find out." They carefully pried open the box, revealing worn fabric stained by age. Inside lay bones, fragile and brittle, bundled with a faded ribbon. A chill ran down Eleanor's spine, a mix of dread and sorrow tightening in her chest. "We need to call the authorities," Melissa said softly, pulling out her phone. "This could be Thomas." Eleanor knelt beside the box, whispering a prayer she hadn't spoken in decades. The woman who had danced alone to a forgotten song now faced the possibility of the final silence. Days later, forensic experts confirmed the grim reality: human remains, aged but identifiable. Yet, as the investigation continued, troubling questions arose. The bones' DNA did not match any records connected to Thomas Reed. Eleanor's fragile hope wavered like a candle in the wind. Had Thomas truly vanished into the void? Or was someone else buried here, another victim of the Hargrave family's ruthless secrets? The revelation sent ripples through the family and the community. Old wounds reopened, and buried truths clawed their way to the surface. Melissa confronted her mother in the quiet of apartment 3B, where shadows stretched long and the weight of grief settled deep. "We didn't find Thomas," Melissa said, voice heavy with regret. "But we found proof that someone was silenced here. Someone who didn't deserve it." Eleanor nodded slowly, tears streaming. "They tried to bury him. Or maybe someone else. But the music, the love, they can't be buried." Outside, Baltimore's streets thrummed with life, indifferent to the ghosts haunting a forgotten garden. For Eleanor, the dance wasn't over. It had only just begun. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the small hospice room where Edward Hargrave lay, his once imposing frame reduced to a frail shadow beneath the crisp white sheets. His eyes, sharp despite age and illness, flickered open as Melissa and Eleanor entered, their presence stirring memories he'd long tried to bury. Melissa stood near the window, arms crossed, while Eleanor approached the bedside with a hesitant step. The air was thick with years of unspoken truths, resentment, and the burden of a legacy that refused to fade. "Grandfather," Melissa began, her voice steady but cold. "We need to talk." Edward's gaze sharpened. "You mean to confront me with your accusations? You think the Hargrave name is stained beyond repair because of old family stories?" Eleanor swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the bed. "It's not just stories. We have proof, documents, testimonies. You silenced a man because of who he was. You destroyed love because of your pride." Edward's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Pride? No. Control. You misunderstand power, Eleanor. You think it's easy to keep a family's reputation intact in a world that wants to see you fall?" Melissa stepped forward, voice rising. "At what cost? How many lives were ruined? How many truths buried to keep your secrets safe?" Edward's eyes darkened with anger. "You don't understand the world I lived in, the pressures, the threats. You think I wanted to be the villain? I did what was necessary. You don't bury music, you bury mistakes." Eleanor's heart clenched. The cruel irony of his words was not lost on her. The music, her love, her pain, was what refused to die. But the mistakes, the sins of the past, had cast a long, suffocating shadow. Melissa's voice softened, exhaustion creeping in. "We're not here to condemn you, grandfather. We want to understand. We want to bring justice for Thomas, and for Mom." Edward's gaze faltered for a moment, a flicker of remorse breaking through the hard exterior. "Justice? The world isn't kind to people like us. You have to be strong, ruthless, even. I did what I thought was best for the family." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "Love isn't something you can control or erase. And silence doesn't heal wounds, it deepens them." The room fell into heavy silence, broken only by the soft beeping of the medical monitor. Melissa glanced at her mother, seeing the years of pain etched in her face. "We're going to uncover everything, grandfather. No more secrets." Edward closed his eyes, a weary sigh escaping him. "Be careful what you wish for. Some truths can destroy more than they heal." As they left the hospice, the weight of his warning lingered between them. Outside, Baltimore's streets pulsed with life, but within the walls of that hospital room, a family's darkest legacy hung in the balance, a curse born of fear, power, and the desperate need to control a love that refused to die. Eleanor looked up at the gray sky, determination burning in her eyes. The past could no longer be silenced. It was time for the truth to play on. The sterile hum of the forensic lab was a stark contrast to the storm swirling inside Eleanor's mind. She sat rigidly in a cold metal chair, clutching Melissa's hand as the technician approached with a sealed envelope. Melissa's phone buzzed quietly on the table, a reminder of the world waiting beyond these walls, but for now, the past held them captive. The technician cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. "We've completed the DNA analysis on the remains found in the Hargrave estate. I'm sorry to say, the bones do not match Thomas Reed's DNA." A numb silence followed. Eleanor's breath hitched as tears welled in her eyes, a mixture of relief and fresh anguish flooding through her. "It's not him," Melissa whispered, voice trembling. We thought we had found closure." Eleanor squeezed her daughter's hand, her heart breaking anew. "But if it's not Thomas, then where is he?" The question lingered like a shadow, impossible to shake. That night, Eleanor sat alone in her dim apartment, the record player silent for once. The melody she had danced to for so long now echoed faintly in her memory, a bittersweet soundtrack to a life filled with love and loss. A flashback came unbidden, Thomas's worried eyes the night he vanished, the whispered promise to keep Eleanor safe, the weight of a secret that neither dared to speak aloud. She reached for a worn photograph on the mantel, the two of them, young and hopeful beneath New Orleans streetlights. Eleanor traced the edges, her fingers trembling. The music had always been their bond, but the truth was still elusive. The next morning, a knock at the door shattered the quiet. Melissa opened it to find an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, standing hesitantly with a weathered envelope in hand. "I thought you might want to see this," Mrs. Caldwell said softly, passing the envelope over. Inside was a collection of faded newspaper clippings and a typewritten note. Thomas Reed was seen in Baltimore recently, living quietly at the Willow Creek retirement home under the name James Turner. Melissa's eyes widened in disbelief. "Mom, this could be it. He might still be alive." Eleanor's hands shook as she held the evidence. After all these years, he never stopped playing. Determined to follow the lead, Melissa contacted the retirement home, where the staff confirmed an elderly man named James Turner resided there, a quiet figure known for playing the piano in the common room, his melodies hauntingly familiar to those who listened. Eleanor and Melissa arranged a visit. The day they walked into the softly lit room filled with worn furniture and muted chatter, Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. She scanned the crowd until her eyes settled on a frail man seated at an old, upright piano. His fingers moved slowly but surely over the keys, coaxing out a melody that stopped time itself. "Thomas," Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking. The man's eyes lifted, clouded but sharp with recognition. "Eleanor." Tears spilled down both their faces as the years fell away in an instant. He explained that after learning of Eleanor's pregnancy and the danger she faced, he had fled to protect her and their child, taking on a new identity to stay hidden from those who wanted to erase their love. "I never stopped thinking about you," Thomas said softly. "And the music, it kept me alive." Their reunion was bittersweet, years lost, scars still raw, but it was a final dance to a song that had never truly ended. As their fractured family watched from the doorway, Melissa, Marcus, and even a reluctant Eleanor, the past and present intertwined in that quiet room. The music played on, weaving a new beginning from the threads of a broken past. The sky outside Willow Creek retirement home was painted in soft hues of gold and lavender as the late afternoon sun filtered through the large windows of the common room. The air was thick with quiet anticipation, the kind that hangs when something long awaited is finally about to happen. Eleanor Bennett sat in a wheelchair by the piano, frail but determined. Her silver hair caught the light, and in her eyes burned the same spark that had once ignited dance floors and jazz clubs decades ago. The years had worn her body, but they hadn't dimmed her spirit. Thomas Reed sat beside her, a shadow of the man he once was, yet unmistakably the same soul who had shared laughter, love, and heartbreak with Eleanor all those years ago. His fingers trembled slightly as they hovered over the keys, but when he played, the melody flowed like a river, smooth, haunting, timeless. Melissa stood quietly nearby, watching her mother and the man who had haunted their family's history. Marcus, too, was present, his eyes reflecting pride and a lifetime of untold stories. The room was filled with an audience of residents and staff, many of whom had heard whispers of the love story that had finally found its way to this place. There was a stillness that felt sacred, a pause in time where past and present merged. Eleanor looked at Thomas, her voice soft but clear. "Shall we dance one last time?" He smiled, a fragile but genuine curve of his lips. "Only if you lead." With effort, Eleanor rose from her wheelchair, supported by Melissa and Marcus. Her steps were slow but steady, guided by a lifetime of memories and the music that had never left her heart. As the first notes filled the room, Eleanor and Thomas moved together in a delicate dance, their bodies remembering the rhythm even when their muscles forgot. She rested her hand lightly on his shoulder, he held her waist gently, and for a moment, the years melted away. Their dance told a story, of love stolen and reclaimed, of pain endured and forgiveness found, of a song that survived silence and shadow. Tears glistened in Eleanor's eyes as she whispered, "I never stopped dancing to our song." Thomas's eyes shone with the same light. "Neither did I." Around them, the room seemed to hold its breath, witnessing a miracle forged by time and the unbreakable bonds of love. After the music faded, Eleanor and Thomas sat together, hands intertwined. The weight of decades pressed lightly now, replaced by a fragile peace. Melissa approached, voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, both of you, for finally letting us in." Marcus nodded. "The past isn't just history. It's the music we carry forward." Outside the window, the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing Baltimore in a warm glow. Eleanor looked out, a smile breaking through the lines on her face. The song was never just mine. It was ours, and now, it's for everyone. As night fell, Eleanor and Thomas shared a quiet moment, the music of their hearts playing on, a final dance that spoke of hope, healing, and the timeless power of love.